Welcome to another episode of the Mind, Body and Pipeline podcast. This week we're with Phil Lewis. Phil and I have got to know each other over the past 9 to 12 months, and we came together after he found some content that I posted about doing a high rocks and getting up early, and it just sort of suits my lifestyle. He'd had a bad experience with a commercial growth business previously. So with that, knowing what we did on the consulting side, plus seeing me mirror his personal life, he got in touch. We become friends. We work together. He's a big advocate of what we're doing at Function, and I'm certainly a big advocate of his. He focuses pretty relentlessly on health and fitness. He's in the gym 6 days a week. He's got a fascinating take on the Olympics, particularly how divers whose entire performance lasts about 14 seconds and build up to the Olympics. His body clock kicks off at 4:30 in the morning. He ultimately needs to be in the gym working out to keep himself healthy and fit. And that's led to a level of wellness that I think lots of people and business owners can only aspire to get to. So he's a guy with a rigorous routine, but one that's not too difficult to mirror if you prioritize it. Hope you enjoy listening to Phil and I having a chat. Phil, thank you again for coming on. We've met, obviously we've worked together for the last few months, and I know quite a lot about your fitness journey, sort of peering into your business journey, month by month. But for the people watching who might not be as familiar with your work and what you do across the two businesses, can you give a quick intro about that? And then I'd also love to hear about how that health and fitness journey has impacted the way that you approach the businesses.
My work is really simple. In the end, what I do as a coach, consultant, mentor, and trainer, a kind of combination of all of those things, is I work with senior people in businesses to help them get to where they want to go. So the kind of work that I tend to get involved with is in a large corporate context. I have a business called Corporate Punk, and normally the kind of clients we get involved with are big global organizations. They've been doing very big change work, and that change work is often run aground. Or in smaller organizations, which is what I do through Phil Lewis Associates, we're talking with CEOs and their boards, and usually they've been trying to bring about some sort of transformation in how the organization's performing, and they've run aground too. And the work is super simple in one sense, which is what we don't allow to happen in any context is you get to do the kind of classic consulting thing of being able to go, well, let's have a long conversation about our systems and our processes or our human capital or any of that nonsense. We sit there and go, whether you're running a large organization or whether you're running a smaller organization, whatever it is, you're not getting where you want to go. It's because people aren't working well enough together. There is some way in which you and the people around you are getting in your own and each other's way, because the core belief of everything I do is that you as the human being have enough passion, energy, insight, ideas, talent, commitment, grit to get exactly where it is you want to go. It's just that because you're a human being and because of how human beings think and how we act and all that sort of stuff, we're just really good at building businesses and working in ways that get in the way of ultimately what we want. So that's the work that I do. I have been described as like a corporate therapist in the past, and I think there is something about that as well. And I think the second part of your question was related to health and fitness and the role that that plays as well. Well, I guess there's so much we can say on this, but ultimately the nature of my work is quite hands-on, and I'm often working in situations where the stakes to the people who are concerned can feel quite high. Stuff's going wrong and people have got mortgages to pay and they've got obligations that they need to meet for their family and the people around them. And they can often feel quite vulnerable and quite exposed in those moments. Often when I get involved with a business, they've been trying to fix something for a really long period of time, and it's just not been going in the way that they want. So there's often quite a lot of emotionality at play. So all of that is a way of saying, actually, to do my work, I need to be on my A game. I actually need to be able to be fully present, fully alert. I need to understand what's going on in me. I need to understand what's going on in the people I'm trying to help, or at least do my best to try and do that. Fully alert, fully present, fully with it. And that kind of mandates that in the end, I'm looking after myself as a sort of vessel of the work, if that doesn't sound too grand, right? It's like I'm doing my bit to make sure I'm capable of doing all of that. And several years ago, I grew to this sort of realization. I remember there's a few things that happened, and maybe we talk about them a bit more, but I got to a point where, you know, I was drinking a bit and I was a bit overweight, and I just wasn't feeling physically great. And I just got to a point where I was like, this is getting in the way of the work you want to do and who you want to be in the world, right? And it's getting in the way of the value that you want to bring, and it's making you less effective. And I'd basically decided that I needed to kind of change that wholesale. So skipping forward now a good few years, you know, I don't drink. I'm in the gym 6 days a week, doing a variety of functional fitness stuff. I'm in my late 40s, but I'm probably in better shape than I was in my mid 20s. And it's had a huge impact for me on my mental health, my emotional health, but I think more importantly, my ability to do my job. So we can talk a lot more about all that, but basically that's a little bit around the whys and wherefores, I suppose.
Nice, lovely. Have you always been sporty? Were you into
Not in the
sports?
slightest.
No?
God, no. No. I have a visual impairment, which means I can't see in 3D, right? So I only see in 2 dimensions. I think I've told you that before, but I only see in 2D, which makes judging distances really difficult for me. I only realized this about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I had an optician actually explain to me the impact. But basically, I grew up in school, which was a very big rugby school where I went to school. And I was absolutely useless. I mean, absolutely useless. Partly, I don't particularly like getting thumped, but partly, I just can't judge distance. So any kind of like ball game, terrible at it, basically. But I didn't know that when I was going through school. I just thought I was just really not very talented in that space. So you can imagine the kind of abuse I would get pretty much all day, every day. But I grew up loathing sports, and I'm not actually, even to this day, particularly interested. I mean, I didn't realize the Euros was on until the day of the final. And I quite like the Olympics, but again, we can talk about why that is. But I wouldn't describe myself as sporty at all. Now, I think there's a distinction between what I would call health and fitness and sport. I think they're different things, actually. And I would still to this day say I couldn't locate my interest in most sports with the Hubble telescope.
Yeah, nice. Well, dive into the Olympics piece.
There's something really interesting for me. I actually, there's something very emotionally resonant for me with the Olympics and the work I try and do with people. I don't think it's a good thing to try and, there's too many sporting metaphors in business in general, right? There's not actually that much commonality between sports and business in some senses, certainly not in terms of the work I do. But what I really love about the Olympics is that sense of people toiling away for years and years, often in really quite obscure sports, and making huge self-sacrifices for these 1 or 2 moments that they get where everything might come together or not. And, you know, if you look at like professional diving in the Olympics, which I'm really obsessed by diving, because if you went right through to the diving final, the total amount of actual competition time a professional diver has is something like 14 seconds over the course of an Olympics. It's absolutely ridiculous, like 14 seconds or something. And I really feel there's something in that, and a lot of the business owners and founders and CEOs that I work with, they're often people who've taken really big risks. They've actually made quite big sacrifices. They've toiled away in obscurity for a really, really long period of time. And they're trying to do a really hard thing, you know, and they're trying to do a really hard thing that has a non-negligible chance of failure. So I sort of see some commonality, but I just love the human interest of it, you know, that sort of, you know, you see the most incredible stories in the Olympics of triumph against adversity, and at the same time, you know, times when people don't triumph as well. And there's a lot of humanity in all of that, you know.
Yeah, there was the British pole vaulter, I think it was, when I was watching it in the summer. She was tipped for gold, wasn't she? I don't think she even got through the prelims. You know, 4 years of toil and effort and energy, and just to have that, like you said, probably slightly longer than 14 seconds, but even for a pole vaulter, it might not be that much longer. I think she got three stabs at it. Is it 25 seconds or something? Maybe not even that they do the run. And then, yeah, for a minute, all came crumbling down. And I guess there's, like you said, some correlation between your work, the CEOs and the boards that you work with and that. But the team mentality, we've had somebody else on that talks about, working together as a team and, from sporting team perspective, they see that. But I see through your lens, it's more Olympic focus rather than team sport.
Yeah, I mean, when you're working with groups of people, sometimes, I will work only with a CEO. Sometimes you'll work with a CEO and one or two others in a senior leadership team or on a board. Sometimes you'll work with an entire board, but it's always a team game, actually, in truth, because even when you're working with a leader who's trying to get somewhere and is struggling in whatever sense to get there, what's normally going on is in some way they've hit the limits of their knowledge, their experience, their skill set, their perceived ability to cope, the wisdom that they have access to, whatever you want to call it. There's some sort of blocker. And sometimes those blockers are actually psychological and emotional in nature. And that's where the work is and where the work needs to be done. But that's always impacting on the people around them. And they're always in relationship with the people around them. And those relationships are where any work ultimately has to manifest the difference, right? Like if you're going to be working with a particular leader, or your work, and well, put it this way, if you're going to be working with a particular leader and it's not impacting how they manage the relationships around them, then it's probably not really having an impact at all. I do think it's always, it is always a team game at some level. But as I say, because I know nothing about sports, I'm kind of loath to draw too many parallels, I would say.
And it'd be a bit cheesy, I think, to have all those sporting analogies in those meetings that you're having as well. Not the right time and place.
Well, I mean, you just do get all these sort of tosspot non-execs who come along and will sort of sit there and go, well, the race is never won overnight. And you're just like, oh, dear God, So I think, I think avoiding metaphorical cliche is a good thing anyway at the best of times.
I agree. I've known you for a few months. I know you've got a lot going on. You do a lot of travel. How do you manage to build fitness into your weekly routine? And it seems easy from what I know of it, or what I've seen you do and how you do it, but has it always been easy? Or
I don't think it's easy at all, actually. And what I mean by, it depends what you mean by easy. I mean, I think that I have 5 values in life, right? Integrity, creativity, excellence, mutuality, and grit. Those are fundamentally the 5 things I believe in, organize my businesses around, and all the rest of it. And I would say I have learned more about integrity and grit through my exercise, if you want to call it regime, to give too grand a term. Routine is probably a better word, over the last few years than I have on it by reading any business book or whatever. And for me, it's that, again, you end up talking cliches, but it's the sort of consistency beats willpower point, right? Yeah. The one thing I've done over the last few years just made exercise a non-negotiable in my life. Now, there's one thing that does make it easy and that really helps me, which is I'm blessed with a body clock, or cursed with a body clock, depending on your perspective. That means I wake up at 4:30 every morning. Now, again, I don't particularly care for that kind of you see a lot of it on LinkedIn. I rise at 4:30, meditate for half an hour, take my ice bath, kiss my sleeping wife on the cheek, and then go to work at the sales coalface. You're like, none of that. I just happen to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, right? And I actually have 2 choices, I think, in my life, which is I either work with that energy, work with that rhythm, or work against it. And I've chosen to work with it. So what that actually means for me is that I tend to be in the gym by 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. If I'm traveling, because as you say, I do quite a lot of travel, particularly at the moment, probably too much, actually, to be honest. I will very specifically pick hotels that have 24-hour gyms. So I have a travel agency and they're always briefed, which is there's a certain level of quality of accommodation, but the next thing is 24-hour gym is an absolute must, and a proper gym, not just, 3 shitty dumbbells and an elliptical trainer, And so for me, having that as a kind of rhythm in my life and making that a non-negotiable thing has been the thing. And because it's non-negotiable, I don't get to have an emotional relationship with it. So for example, this morning, I had to go and do, I don't know what it was. I think I was doing 800-meter sprints this morning for an hour, and I was just not in the mood. I was just cannot be bothered. I was like, well, it wasn't quite sprints, but it was sort of interval work with 800-meter intervals for an hour. I can't, I just, this is not, I'm just not feeling this today. I thought as I got on the treadmill and did it anyway. Do you know what I mean? And I think that for me is the kind of secret of it. And then that's the whole point about integrity and grit, right? Because integrity is, I may not feel like doing this, but it is my promise to myself that I will. And grit is that I'm not always going to enjoy it. Like I didn't enjoy it today, but it doesn't matter. You just keep going. Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of how I get through it, I think.
Yeah, do what you say you're going to do. I think is important,
100%.
more important to yourself than it is, outside in sort of the business world. Integrity and grit, learn more from the physical side of things. Can you expand on that a little bit? And let me ask a question to frame that. How do you think that pushing yourself physically has shaped the way that you set or approach the goals that you have, either for your own businesses or for your clients' businesses?
It's such a great question. So some of my job, and this is going to sound a bit, maybe a little odd, I don't know, but some of my job is about sitting in discomfort. So because often what clients come to you with are really quite complicated problems, or what they experience as complicated problems, and certainly quite emotional problems. The kind of stuff you get would be complete misalignment across the board about the right way forward for the business, or business partners falling out, or it might be to do with organizational performance is really suffering and no one's quite sure why. Or it might be to do with, I'm really stuck as a CEO and just don't know how to lead anymore where I am at the moment, right? And what I would say is usually it's taken an organization a period of time to get itself into that state, or an individual period of time to get itself into that state. So the answers aren't always immediately clear. Right? It's not immediately obvious to anybody what needs to be done. And the work that needs to happen to get to those answers and then enact those answers can take time. So that's what I mean by sitting in discomfort, right? The discomfort of not knowing, the discomfort of not having any guarantee that the decisions that you make are actually going to work, the discomfort sometimes of having really difficult conversations with the people around you about what's going on, why it's going on, and what to do about it, all of that. And for me, that directly mirrors the experience of being sat in discomfort physically as well, which I've done high rocks, an hour plus in the pain cave.
Yes.
There is something about that which actually directly mirrors that. I mean, I should also say my emotional capacity to cope with discomfort has also been enhanced by doing psychotherapy qualifications and doing a master's in exec coaching at the moment. I've been doing what I do for a very, very long time, but nevertheless, having to go through that physically, and you're in those moments sometimes where the old pain cave thing where you're in those moments and it's like, oh God, you just give anything for it to be over. As I found out, wall ball number 120 when I kept being bloody no reps in Stockholm.
I'm normally burpee number 4, where you set off with the tensions and you hit the floor and then you're thinking, this is so lovely down here. It's lovely.
Yeah. And I would say, I would say that, which is when you're just in the middle of that kind of discomfort, you just really want it to be over. There is learning in that. There is teaching in that, and I think as human beings, we get stronger from anything that we can actually bear. Yeah. And I think physical exercise and really tough physical exercise is a part of being able to do that. I would just say the other thing as well about integrity, which is the keeping the promises you make to yourself.
Yeah.
And the promises you make to others as well, right? I mean, again, I don't see a lot of that in the business world, right? I don't see a lot of it, to be honest. I see, or maybe let me put it another way. I see less of it than I would like in the business world. And so to try and walk through the world as somebody who does his best, in fact, the thing about integrity, I believe we all fail at it sometimes in different ways, but I'm doing my best. And so again, being able to show up for my clients, knowing that that is how I'm trying to show up in my life matters to me, even if they would never know that. Do you know what I mean? Directly know that anyway.
Yeah, no, I love that. I like that. Commitment. What drives you to stay committed to your health regime, both in the short term, day to day, and in the long term?
Well, as I say, I just think it's a discipline now. That I think is the thing. I would also add to that though that what drives me to stay committed.
Maybe a word to rephrase it. Are there any specific goals or things
Well, I
that you?
like getting stronger. I mean, I would say I like getting stronger. I think there's definitely something in that. I'm 46, 47 very soon. And there's something for me also about being a good friend to my future self in all of this.
Yeah,
You know, that I do genuinely believe that physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, we kind of there's a wonderful Robert Louis Stevenson quote, which I'm very fond of, which is sooner or later every man must sit down to a banquet of consequences. And I have seen in my own life with friends and family, sometimes there's banquets of consequences in different ways, not being so great, you know? And I don't think there's ever any certainties in life, but I do think that there are things we can do to stack the deck in our favor, right? And so for me, that keeps me committed. That thing about being a friend to my future self and also wanting my banquet of consequences to be okay. The other thing I would say, just specifically on alcohol, I started off in the advertising industry when I started work in whenever it was, a while back, 25 years ago, or whatever. And I was quite a heavy drinker for quite a lot of years. And a really bad drinker, I would say. And what I mean by bad is in two ways. One is I just never agreed with me alcohol. Like I never, it just like physically, some people can process it really well. And I'm just not one of those people. And also, I didn't necessarily sort of enjoy it. What was going on for me a lot of the time was actually, you don't get this necessarily if you encounter me in these sorts of formats, if you encounter me at work, but I'm actually quite a shy human being and quite introverted and reserved if you knew me outside of work. And so it was the sort of confidence juice, do you know what I mean, in my sort of 20s and 30s. And what I think, I'm actually quite profoundly anti-alcohol these days. I find not to be preachy about it because I just think people have got, I'm also profoundly liberal, so I think people have got to make their own choices, you know. But I'm like, I just think it robs you of your ability to be present. And it robs you of your ability to kind of experience life in all of its richness. And sometimes experiencing life in its richness means experiencing uncomfortable stuff, painful stuff, and having to kind of learn to bear all of that. And I would say my life has been immensely improved by giving up alcohol over the last few years. And I have a sobriety app that I use. I log it on a daily basis, really just for sport these days, because it's quite nice to see how many days and all that. But one of the things that the sobriety app has is that when I started on the journey, I wrote a whole set of commitments to myself about why I wasn't going to drink, how it made me feel physically, how it made me feel emotionally, what I thought the knock-on impact was. I also have alcoholic family members as well. So I kind of, another reason to give up, I just kind of didn't want to go down that road. I've also seen it, that kind of middle-class bottle of wine thing really take people over in their 40s and 50s. And I just didn't want that either, you know. So I wrote all this stuff down and I still review it on a daily basis. And I found that to be, bizarrely, its power hasn't waned over all the years that I've been sober now. You know, it's a good few years. And actually the power of it remains really consistent in my life because you're not going back to that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I did something similar when I gave up. I'm 5 years in Jan, and we don't want to dominate this with anti-drinking. It's interesting insight. A couple of people that I've spoken to over the last few weeks don't drink as well, and it's just that, I don't know. I describe it as a compound effect. When you stop drinking for a month, you think you feel really good. You thought you felt good before, and then every single month, every year, it just compounds, whether that be physically, mentally, financially, things just really start to compound. And I definitely don't, well, I hope I don't preach anti-drinking. I agree with you. I think people should make their own decisions. But what I do say to people quite directly sometimes is that I do not feel that there are any downsides to not drinking. I haven't been able to find one yet.
I think there are. Well, I think the interesting thing is this, and I think this is true of, I think it's a broader point actually, which is a lot of human behavior, pretty much all of human behavior can be explained by a very simple psychological principle, which is we're trying to get away from things that we find unpleasant and towards things that we find pleasant, right? Which sounds like completely no shit Sherlock, doesn't it? But actually, I don't think we acknowledge the power of that in our lives a lot of the time. So what's going on with drinking is a very understandable behavior, which is I'm trying to get away from, like the famous journalist and alcoholic A.A. Gill said, no one ever picked up a glass of wine thinking it would make their day worse, right?
No.
And so it's this thing around what we're trying to do is get away from something that is unpleasant. And sometimes that's our feelings, right? Because we can be in fear of our feelings about what's going on for us. And you know, a lot of the time, all fear is really fear of feeling a certain way. And then what we want to do is try a little bit better. So I think it's just down to, these are all just coping mechanisms. And I think for me, if I'm honest, you know, exercise is a coping mechanism, right? It just happens to be a way better coping mechanism through the lens of my work, through the lens of my health, through the lens of my wealth, through the lens of whatever else than drinking does. But I try and come at everything at work, right? I mean, I don't always succeed because I'm a human being and I have good days and bad days and all of that. But I try and come at everything in my life through the lens of sort of compassion and positive intent, right? So in other words, people are just doing what they think they need to do to be able to cope with whatever the world is throwing at them. And and so for me, the choices that we make and those choices are influenced by a lot of things, from advertising and marketing through familial conditioning, through to genetics, through to all sorts of stuff. I think the question for us all ultimately is, what choices are we making, and can we make better choices? And so I don't want to be judgmental on all this stuff at all. But you asked me about commitment. So to go back to that, I would say, you know, my commitment is to try and be the best friend to myself that I can be. And the best friend to me means actually, and in a way, the best help to my clients. And that both of those things mandate healthy choices. Really felt the benefit of it.
Yeah, no, I like that quote as well. It's one I've never heard before, that no one picked up a glass of wine and thought it made their day worse. Well, one that I found, and not quite sure where it came from, either I made it up or somebody much wiser than me said it and I've just picked it up and pretended it was mine, is nobody woke up the next morning wishing they'd had more to drink, is something that I'm sure has been come into my ears from somewhere. And I realized when I stopped drinking that what I was doing was, first and foremost for me, I had to fall back in love with myself, and I was using drink to escape my reality. But now the exercise, it's a different way of saying the same thing, escape my reality. The HIIT classes that I do, for example, and it used to be five-a-side football, and that stopped doing it for me, blocked out work, the noise, the plate spinning for that hour. That's what it does. And if you do 3 or 4 HIIT style classes a week, that's 3 or 4 hours where you are just in the moment.
I mean, I'm very into quite heavy house and techno music. And so my kind of happy place is in the gym. Even when it's not happy, it kind of is. Like even this morning doing those 800-meter interval things, you know, I had a really good DJ mix on for an hour, the phone on Do Not Disturb. And it's just like, oh, thank God, you know. And I think that's the thing for me. It's about how do you resource yourself to be able to do the work that you need to do in the world, right? And I see what I do as anybody who knows me and the stuff I put up on it, LinkedIn about it as well. I see what I do as a vocation, right? So it's a very strange thing to hear a consultant talk about, the idea, because a lot of the time people think consultants are quite sort of cynical, hard-bitten types. I think I'm the opposite in a way. I see what I do as a calling. So I think there is a real need for people who are in businesses or trying to do hard things in life to have people to talk to who are kind of in it with them and not at the same time, which is ultimately the role of the advisor, the consultant, the helper, or whatever you want to call it. And it's a role I'm really good at, right? And it's something I like to do. And I also have seen over years and years and years the kind of breakthroughs that it helps people to make. But I feel a real ethical responsibility in it as well. Like I have an ethical responsibility to be really highly trained. I have no time for the grifters in our market at all. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of crappy coaches and consultants and business mentors, people who really have no business saying they do any of this kind of work at all. So I think you have to really tend to it. And it's like you tend to it through qualifications and professional development. You tend to it by surrounding yourself with really excellent people from a professional standpoint who can continue to lift you up and push you on. And you tend to it by looking after yourself. And this is the other thing we haven't touched on, but I think is really important. I mean, I want to model what it means to look after myself, because I also want to communicate to clients that I'm therefore reasonably qualified to take care of your business, right?
Mm.
I mean, I can put this in a very unflattering way sometimes and say no one wants to hire a fat consultant. I'm not having a go at people who are overweight. There's lots and lots of reasons why people who are overweight, right? And the last thing those people need is a sense of greater shame around that, right? But what does matter is that, you know, we are, as people who are trying to help others, we are showing up in a way that communicates to other people that we are capable of doing that work. And I believe how we take care of ourselves and how we show up emotionally, how we show up mentally and intellectually, how we show up physically is actually really quite an important part of it. And that's why I think what you're doing, not that you're asking me to say nice things about what you're doing at Function, but I think that is why what you're doing at Function is really valuable, actually, because not only are you bringing people together who are interested in the same stuff that you're at and therefore have similar values and are wanting to, you know, connect with others in that space, but I also think it is a form of modeling, and it's a form of modeling actually how those of us who are trying to help other businesses in the way that you do might want to think about showing up in the world. And I think that is that should be given the businesses that we want to help and the people we want to help a degree of confidence in the work that we're then going to do, I would hope. Having said that, you know, abs does not qualify you in and of itself, yeah, just to be clear.
Absolutely. I agree. I did a LinkedIn post about it. I say quite a lot. It's I do want to give across the impression that I've got my shit together. And I think just being organized and being consistent in all areas of life shows that. It's little things like, you know, I mentioned it the other day, having your shirt ironed, getting your hair cut regularly, making sure your car is clean, stuff like little things like that to me are really important. They might not be to other people. I get that. But for me, it's all part of just showing that you are organized, that you are planning in advance, and that essentially you've got your shit together. But yeah, we could talk about that type of topic for a long, long time, couldn't we? Let's talk about setbacks. So we all have times when things get tough. I was just thinking about this morning, your 800 meters wasn't quite a setback because you stepped on it, but have you ever had a period where you dropped off the health routine? And second question to that is, how did you get back on track?
Well, the answer to that in the last 3 or 4 years, the answer to that's no. Actually, I've been astonishingly consistent over that time. And I say astonishingly because it's astonished me. What I would say is that there are two ways that I've struggled, though. The first way that I have struggled is I have struggled to take rest. So rest is actually the thing I struggle with the most about health and fitness. Because and this is, by the way, this is another way that I think health and fitness is a great teacher. It can point you in the direction of work you need to do or attention you need to pay in your life outside of not just limited to the fitness journey itself, right?
Okay.
So for me, next week my trainer has mandated I'm not going to pick up a weight all week, because basically I've been on a big strength push for the last 3 months and I need a deload week. I actually just need to do sort of light cardio. He will tell you that of all the things that we do together, that is the thing I will struggle with the most. And yet actually it will be the thing that allows me again to keep moving forward, because if we're not taking time out, our muscles can't heal and grow and all of that. And it's quite important. Periodization thing's quite important. What that also then manifests itself in is I have to pay very, very close attention to my mobility and all of that. Now I'm a little bit older than maybe other people you've had on your podcast. I'm 46, 47. And you know, I can get injured. As all of us, as we get older, we have to pay more attention to injury. And you'll see people who are in the gym who are serious, who are in their 60s, will have to spend 2 or 3 times longer warming up than someone who's in their 20s or their 30s. And I've had a really bad kind of quad injury that lasted for really about 9 or 10 months.
Wow.
And I had to do quite a lot of rehab on that. But where that came from was not taking enough rest and not doing enough mobility work. So I would say that's the stuff that I've had to really pay attention to. So it's not been about dropping off in the level of consistency, but there have been those sorts of battles, I think, along the way, you know.
Outside of, because I'm the same in terms of your morning routine, you've got a successful business or businesses, but a personal life to juggle. Outside of sticking those things in the morning, have you got any other advice for finding that balance between work, business, health and fitness, and then what strategies work best for you when it comes to managing your time. Block everything in your diary, color code things. I actually told somebody, and I know I keep talking when I've asked you several questions, I told somebody about your, because they talked about their health and fitness routine drops off every time they go away. And I said, well, I know Phil, this is what he does. And they were like, that is so obvious. You know, the 24-hour gym and picking hotels based on that. That obviously allows you to stay on track. But what other strategies have you got when it comes to managing the time between the work, personal, family, health?
Well, I would say a routine is really important. So for me, kind of being able to say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, strength day.
Yeah.
Tuesday tends to be, it wasn't this week, and I'll talk about that in a second, but Tuesday is running, Saturdays, functional fitness work, Sundays rest. I also go boxing on a Thursday, right? But that's more of a skill in my head. So having a routine really matters, and that routine is well baked, and it's in the diary for months at a time. So I just don't take meetings and also, by the way, it does help because I'm in the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning. So there are certain people, I'm talking to one of them on this podcast, who actually quite likes meeting at 7 a.m., but we are rare, Guy, right? So like normally that's not kind of how it is.
Okay.
But having those things in the diary is really, really important, I think. And I tend to take the view, which is, because I work for myself, and this is therefore easier for me than it is for other people potentially, that is the priority. So I start with that. I start with, this is what I need to get done this week. Now, when I'm traveling, travel tends to get booked in advance. So I will then pre-plan my fitness while I'm traveling well in advance. So for example, this week I knew I was going to be in London on Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, that meant I was on a flight on Tuesday. So it meant there was just no way I was going to get exercising because of my diary in London. So I was like, I'll take that as the rest day and I'll substitute that in for Thursday. And I blocked in Thursday morning to go and do a couple of things, including boxing and running, which is what I did this morning. So for me, just planning is the key to all of it. And I think, like my dad used to say to me, he used to say, Phil, people always make time for things that are important.
Yep.
And I think it's a simple thing, but it's like a human truth, that. And I was like, as uncomfortable as that is, it's true. So for me, I don't allow work to blow up that end of things. The other thing I do, which is I also have a gym membership, which simple things maybe, probably obvious things, but I have a gym membership where there is a club room, which actually allows me to take meetings in the club room sometimes, which again can just help from a kind of efficiency and sort of balance sort of perspective. But I haven't really got anything more than that. I mean, I just think it's non-negotiable for me, and meetings happen to be negotiable. We can negotiate the time of them, we can negotiate the length of them, and we can negotiate, the date of them. So one has to follow the other.
Yeah, we connected because of the mutual passion for health and fitness. And then we got on and we started working together. Have you found, and you are a self-proclaimed introvert, but have you found business opportunity within the, I suppose, fitness communities that you are a part of and have been a part of before?
No, but that is not to say I don't believe it exists. Also, so the other thing for me is, I mean, I poured praise on your proposition only a few minutes ago, so I'm not about to do so again now. But I think it's a really interesting insight that you've had, right? And I'm very hopeful for the people who come along to the things that you're planning, that actually there will be some real value in it, because I have seen over and over again the kind of camaraderie and the kind of relationships that can be built through fitness. The kind of the people that I train with, including my trainers, are people I get on extraordinarily well with, and really enjoy their company and all of that. But I would just say the reason why it has not proven to be, I've not really looked to it historically to be a source of business development, is because basically I spend so much of my life having to talk with, communicate with, connect with other people. What I really want a lot of the time from my gym work is to have blaring techno in my ears and not to be disturbed for an hour. And that is actually of greater priority to me in certainly my day-to-day life than having to use it as a kind of BD thing. But the idea of a retreat, for example, where one goes away for 2 or 3 days and there's a sort of mixed focus, I think that's an extremely interesting idea and a very, very good one.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Final question, unless you feel that there's anything that I haven't asked you, but if that's met with silence, then final question for business leaders thinking about prioritizing their health but don't know where to start. What's the one piece of advice that you would offer to help them get going?
I was in the gym this morning and I was looking at a guy who must have been in his mid-70s, and he was doing some really good mobility work, actually. And I had this moment of thinking, God, that's great, you know? And I think that wherever you are is where you should start, you know? And I think a lot of sport is about competition, right? Sport is nature. The nature of sport is competitive a lot of the time, but the nature of exercise doesn't need to be, right? I only compete with one person when I exercise, which is myself and the previous versions of me, right? And wherever I am, that's where I want to start and where I want to continue. And I think the real mistake, look, I don't know how old the listeners to this podcast, the viewers of this podcast are, but I mean, I really didn't start this until I was in my, where am I now? 46, so 43, 44, something like that. And if I walk around comparing myself to guys in their 20s or 30s, right, it's just a hiding to nothing, right? And there's, I feel like what is healthy is not always what is fit, which we haven't talked about, but I think needs talking about more, actually. Yeah. The fit individual can sometimes not be the healthy individual. I think there's a balance between those two things, which is really, really important to understand and to get right. So I would just say my one piece of advice is wherever you are, that's where you should start. And understand that it's a process which is unique to you. What good looks like will be unique to you. What progress will look like will be unique to you. And that comparison is not going to help you. I remember talking to, so you asked one piece of advice, I've gone on, but I remember talking to my boxing coach, and I was talking to him about going and doing high rocks in Sweden. And my God, I felt like the old guy in high rocks, and there's all these kind of guys in their 20s and, literally kind of like ripped, glistening, all that. And he just went, yeah. And how many of them are juicing, Phil? He was like, how much of a dosage do you think most of those people are on? I was like, that's an interesting question, but it really connected me with the thing around stop comparing myself. It doesn't really matter. Like none of it matters. I mean, what matters is, do I feel better today than I did a year ago? Do I feel a better year ago than 2 years ago? The answer is yes, and it's working.
Nice. Love that. Thank you.
Been a pleasure talking to you.
Cheers.